What is going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Pit. Today we're looking at the untold truth about the WWE. Vince McMahon's trailer park childhood.
After a violent and troubled youth and against the odds, he single-handedly took a dying sport and turned it into a juggernaut.
Being the son of a wrestling promoter himself, it's easy to assume that Vince McMahon grew up with at least some financial comfort. This could not be further from the truth. As a New Zealand Herald describes, McMahon grew up dirt poor in a trailer park in North Carolina, and his parents split before he was a year old. Young Vince would not meet his real father until he was 12, and instead grew up with his mom and a revolving door of violent stepdads until he finally had enough and left home at 14. His early experiences on the bottom rung of society's ladder left him with a deep dislike of people who think they're above him. Even as an elderly billionaire, he feels uncomfortable with country clubs and other traditional symbols of the snotty rich. Vince McMahon was almost destroyed by a steroid trial. Bigger is often better in the world of professional wrestling, so performers have been known to dabble in steroids. Vice Sports writes that this nearly brought Vince McMahon crashing down in 1993 when the chairman was charged with routinely acquiring steroids for his wrestlers. According to the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, McMahon used a shady Pennsylvania-based urologist named Dr. George Zahorian to write a steady stream of recipes for his performers' enhancements. Some of Zahorian's most notable customers included Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior, Rowdy Roddy Piper, who admitted as much in his biography, and Vince McMahon himself. Vince McMahon once fought Kofi Kingston for real. Vince McMahon is perfectly happy to throw down with his wrestlers should the opportunity arise. As Sports Keto and Pro Wrestling Sports report, he once even got into a physical fight with Kofi Kingston. According to wrestling legend Chris Jericho, McMahon was flying a number of WWE superstars to a WrestleMania 35 press conference on his private jet. According to wrestling legend Chris Jericho, McMahon was flying a number of WWE superstars to a WrestleMania 26 press conference on his private jet. When the plane landed, McMahon made a strange comment to Kingston: "Maybe you'll get over one of these days." Getting over means you're popular with fans or you can draw a reaction from the crowd. Kingston first didn't react, but Jericho, who was extremely drunk at the time, intervened and told his colleague to go back and confront McMahon because Vince McMahon likes people who stand up to him. Kingston followed the veteran's advice and went for it. After a quick exchange of words, McMahon performed the double-leg takedown on Kingston and the two started brawling on the floor of the plane. After a scuffle, McMahon got up and started laughing. "That's the way to do it," he told Kingston before exiting the plane like nothing had happened. Next up, the trials and tribulations of Vince McMahon's XFL. Vince McMahon has had a very particular dream of decades. He wants to create a personal football league. As Forbes writes, he attempted this in 2001 when he joined forces with NBC to create the XFL. The league played its first and, so far, last season in 2001, and as ESPN notes, it attempted to stand out with gimmicks, flashy cheerleaders, and a wilder set of rules than the NFL. However, the XFL failed to captivate the public and lost McMahon and NBC a whopping $70 million. To this day, it remains the WWE's mogul's biggest financial failure. The sexual assault allegation against Vince McMahon. According to the Daily Beast, in January of 2006, a young worker at a tanning salon in Boca Raton, Florida, told the police that an older man had sexually harassed her at work. The woman said a customer of the tanning salon, identified as Vince McMahon, showed her nude and semi-nude pictures of himself on his phone. Later, he locked her in a tanning room with him, groped her, and attempted to kiss her. The man attempted to dismiss his behavior as just trying to have some fun, but the salon worker was quite understandably shocked and stumbled to a nearby Papa John's in tears, telling the staff that a man had tried to attack and rape her. Vince McMahon's insane physique. Anyone who has ever seen Vince McMahon will walk toward the ring in his wrestling attire knows the man is a beast. He might not be as big as his most gigantic performers, but as the Washington Post notes, he's still so ripped that he featured in the cover of Muscle and Fitness magazine in 2015 when he was a very respectable 69 years old. This is hardly typical for a billionaire CEO who mostly dressed in suits, but then again, McMahon is far from a typical fat cat executive. Vince McMahon has admitted to using steroids during his company's drug-happy years in the 80s and 90s, but later ditched the chemicals in favor of an exercise regime that is so rigorous that it's downright dangerous. In 2016, WWE reported that McMahon had sustained a training injury so severe that it required surgery. As befits a man who works out that obsessively in his 70s, this completely failed to stop him from turning up at the office. And finally, Vince McMahon's a notorious prankster. Vince McMahon might not seem like a prankster, but he loves an elaborate practical joke. In an interview with Back Sports page, Jonathan Coach Coachman recalls the most elaborate jest the chairman ever pulled on him. In 2001, Coach was asked to run a football pool for his talent, and he was eager to accept. The next Tuesday at a SmackDown taping, two cops turned up and arrested him for running an illegal gambling pool. First, they walked Coachman to McMahon's office to let the chairman know what his employee was up to. McMahon went ballistic and yelled at poor Coach for ages in front of Triple H, The Rock, and a number of other WWE people. Coach was then walked out in handcuffs and driven away in a cop car to the surprise and shock of a passing Undertaker who wasn't in on the joke. The ordeal lasted for 45 minutes before the car was finally told to return, and Coach discovered the whole thing had been a ruse orchestrated by McMahon. Even Vince McMahon's acquaintances outside the wrestling world aren't necessarily safe from his pranks. According to Wrestling Inc., he once hired the vampire-themed wrestler Gone Girl for a single short match at Madison Square Garden just because he wanted the wrestler's messy, blood-spitting entrance to soak Donald Trump, who was sitting in the front row. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this video of WWE Pit. Make sure you guys destroy that like button if you enjoyed. Comment down below what you think of Vince and the WWE as a whole, and I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe.